In this tutorial, I'll give an introduction to closures and we'll look at an example of an immediately invoked function expression. Technically, all functions in JavaScript are closures because what closures means is that a function has a scope chain associated with it. So all functions in JavaScript will have some scope chain associated with it, whether that's a global or a local scope. But what is usually meant when people refer to closure is when a function is invoked under a different scope chain than the one that was in effect when the function was defined. And one purpose of closures is to create private variables. So what I'm doing here is we're creating a variable 5, and after that we're creating a variable called private number. Now at first it looks like private number is set to a function, but actually what it's set to is an immediately invoked function expression. And one hint that we have that this is an immediately invoked function expression, or an iffy, is that it starts with a parentheses and it ends with a parentheses, and then we have end of statement right there. This will work if you don't put it in these, and we can test that later, or don't put it in the parentheses, but it's best practice to wrap it in parentheses, and it also gives other programmers a heads up that they are dealing with an iffy here if they're working on your code. So let's look at what's happening inside here. So we have private number. Inside the parentheses we have a function, and we have the whole function body right here, starting from here down to here, and after that we have two parentheses, which is making the function become invoked. Okay, so this function is invoking itself right here. And inside the function we have a local variable counter set to 0. So this counter and this counter are separate. This one's in the global scope, and this one is hidden inside the function. It has its own scope inside the function. And after that we are returning a function. So many times in functions we're going to return a number to the variable, or we're going to return a string, but in this case we are going to return a function. And what that function is going to do is it's going to return counter plus plus. Now when this thing returns counter plus plus, it's going to follow the scope chain and look for this counter plus plus. So inside its own function body there's no counter variable set. So what it's going to do is it's going to go up the scope chain that it has access to, and of course it has access to this counter right here because they were defined in the same scope. So what this is going to do is it's going to return, what it's going to do is it's going to first return this counter, which is 0, and that's going to be a returned private number, and then it's going to increment counter to 1. So with variables like counter plus plus, when we have the plus plus at the back of the variable, what it's going to return is it's going to return the unincremented value back to the variable, and then it's going to increment this to 1. So if you're having trouble understanding closures, a simple way to think about it is right here. So while this private number was set to this kind of complicated iffy, really what's happening is this function, you can just think this function is going right into here. So here I have return example is set to function, and then inside the function body return counter plus plus, end of statement, and of course when I'm doing this in the global scope here, well, now I'm not working with anything inside the function. I'm dealing with this global variable right here. So I'm just returning counter plus plus, and then I'm running the document write function on return example, but I have two parentheses after here. So because this was set to a function, we can now invoke this function, and then we're writing out whatever comes out of that. So let's take a look at that, and that gives us a 5. And so what we did was we output this one right here, and now this counter is 6. Okay. Let's just remove that for now and refresh. And let's go down here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to write out the counter, 5. And the next thing we're going to do is we are going to, this private number had a function returned to it, so now we can invoke the function just like this. And let's see that. And we have a 0. So it returned it, and then this is now 1. It incremented it to 1 after it returned it. And just for examples purposes, I'm just going to remove the ending parentheses and remove the first one and just try to run this again, and you'll see that works fine. But with immediately invoked function expressions, it's best practice to put these in parentheses because the code is more legible that way. And we'll do it again. And one more time. And finally, I'm just outputting the counter that's in the global scope. So we can see how this was useful. We had 2 counters going on, and this one was a private variable, and we needed to, the only way that this counter could be incremented was by running this function. So this counter variable could only get affected through this function right here, which is able to increment it by 1 each time. So we can see why it's useful is because this counter variable is protected and it's not able to be overwritten inside the global scope. And we run this function which runs this one, which is the only one that's able to affect this variable. Thanks for watching.